If you know anything about Team Fortress 2, you probably recognize this man, who stands over all of us with that smug smile on his face. This is the Heavy Weapons Guy, affectionately known as just Heavy in-game and in his Meet the Team video. Hailing from the Soviet Union, he has the greatest stature of all the 9 mercenaries that were enlisted to fight in the Gravel War. Despite his large, bullet sponge mass and his generally charismatic nature, he is an extremely formidable foe in combat. Sporting a sizable health pool and an arsenal of weapons built to maximize damage, the Heavy has all the tools he needs to do his job in a short amount of time. His job description is literally mow down, and that is exactly what you'll do to enemies in your path if you pick this class. However, all of the power people attribute to Heavy is under the assumption that he's just that, heavy. What would happen if he wasn't? We all take the gameplay of the Team Fortress 2 classes for granted when we pick them from the class selection screen. So what would happen if what we remembered about them wasn't the same anymore? Specifically, if we took away the defining feature of a class and then tried to play the game using their bastardized form, how enjoyable would we still find them to be? I thought it would be interesting to conduct this experiment on Heavy, the poster boy of TF2 itself. So in this video, I'm going to be trying out just that. But before we even get to the gameplay discussion, we first have to know what the Heavy is all about and how we can account for what we will be removing. Let's first go over what we know the most about the beefy, Bologna-loving boss man, apart from his size, of course. The Heavy has a base health of 300, with which he is able to withstand a lot of damage, and he needs this because he is the largest hitbox of any other class. None of them even come close in terms of max health, with Soldier having the next highest at 200, only increasing to 220 if he has the battalion's backup equipped. Not to be outdone, the Heavy runs at a pitiful speed of 230 hammer units per second. The only characters near Heavy's speed are the Demoman and the Soldier, with 280 and 240 hammer units per second respectively. His primary is always a minigun with 200 ammo, which deals between 50 and 300 damage per second, depending on how good a player's aim is and how close they are to their target. In order to fire this gun, a spin-up must be performed, and during that time and firing, the Heavy's speed is reduced even more, particularly if he is unfortunate enough to be holding the Brass Beast. As for his secondaries, they range from reliable backup sources of damage like the shotgun to items that replenish a player's health such as the sandwich. There's even an item that enables a Heavy to go on a melee rampage with guaranteed mini crits for 16 seconds. And lastly, Heavy's melee weapons are decent last resort tools, mostly focusing on damage resistances or speed increases, whether that be move speed or swing speed. This leaves us with 6 potential defining characteristics that embody Heavy: his size, health, speed, and 3 weapon slots. But we can't take all of these away from him. Otherwise, other videos like this would make every class exactly the same, and that simply wouldn't make for good discussion. So we have to compromise and figure out which of these is most integral to the character. You always see Heavy standing to attention with his arms being overshadowed by his massive torso or holding up his minigun, for it is his darling. So right away we can drop the secondary and melee weapon slots from this list, for they don't resonate with the image he conveys. We can also scrub the Heavy's size from this list because changing that would require not only custom modeling but also hitbox changes, and we all know I'm too stupid to do either of those things. I think it's also okay for us to ignore his slow movement speed, for there isn't a drastic difference when compared to the Soldier. That leaves us with his high health and powerful primary weapon, and since I couldn't decide on one of these to remove, I could only conclude that both of these were Heavy's most important traits. So now that we know what to get rid of, we have to figure out how to do so and implement those changes into the game. First, we need to decide on a weapon that will replace the minigun, since it's left a gaping hole in the primary slot. We don't need to look to any other classes, however, for the Heavy already has a good enough damage dealer as a secondary, the shotgun. All we need to do is move it to the primary slot so we can use the engineer's version of the shotgun for this purpose, as it's identical aside from the different slot. Then we have to deal with the problem of Heavy having too much health, and that's easy. Recall that the next largest base health value is the Soldier's, who only has 200, so by simply adding a 100 health penalty to the shotgun, the Heavy's health is now identical to that. As for the secondary slot, since the second shotgun would be practically useless, the Buffalo Steak sandwich is far more risk than reward, and the sandwich gives 100 more health than we need, we have 2 good options: the Delocus bar or the second banana. I personally recommend the second banana because I'm more familiar with it. It effectively takes the role of the stock sandwich by fully replenishing the Heavy's reduced health, but But I do think the Delocus bar could still be useful, for while it only does half the job, it can overheal the Heavy to 50 past his max health. That only leaves his melee slot, but since Heavy doesn't really have any particularly good choices for melee because he's more of a tank class, we really don't need to choose a specific weapon for this slot. If you have a favorite Heavy melee, you should still be able to use it given the previous changes. Now it's time to see what this looks like in-game. I played on my own TF2 server, 5th Planet, which adds the primary shotgun with less health to Heavy using a plugin called Custom Weapons X. If you want to play with a custom weapon I made for this experiment, use the command CWX to select the not heavy shotgun and vote CWX to turn custom weapons on. A link to the announcement video will be in the description where you can find the server IPs. So, after gathering footage for 2 consecutive streams, I'm going to attempt to answer what it's like to play as a lighter Heavy. Seeing the gameplay I'm showing now, or even just by hearing me describe the loadout beforehand, you might already be thinking of Fat Scout, a Heavy playstyle that involves willfully ignoring your primary weapon because you're powerful enough to survive on your shotgun alone. And while both Fat Scout and this stripped down Heavy are very similar, you could get away with a lot more as a Fat Scout than with this loadout. Unsurprisingly, the reduced health is the real killer here. A Heavy only having 2/3 of his default max health means that all of his matchups change for the worse. Because you die quicker, you find that it becomes far more difficult to maintain pressure on the enemy team. The one benefit to this loadout is the lunchbox item. You don't have to go hunting for a health pack unlike a Fat Scout, for you'll almost always be at max health when initiating a fight. But that doesn't take away from the fact that you need to dip out of combat frequently, causing you to play a lot more passively as a result. With less practicality comes the need for efficiency, and if we're ignoring the help your team can provide, that means you need to rely on your accuracy, positioning, and ability to predict the movements of your enemies. I found myself using or backpedaling to high ground a fair bit, and I figured that this was due to more of my shots connecting compared to my enemy when I was higher up, even if only by a little. But if there was no height variation around me, I could always rely on thick walls and barriers to give myself a quick break from the action to reload or refill my health. You can also hide behind the cart, but that's only for a short time, and the longer you can hide yourself, the better. Sure, hiding doesn't always work, and you might die senselessly at the hands of a pyro, but you've got to try to keep yourself alive. Now, when it comes to attacking, you need to have the advantage, for it's very unlikely that you'll survive if you have the same or less health than your enemy. To get this advantage, I try to find flank routes to surprise the enemy from the side or behind, or just wait until they were busy reloading to ambush them.
Yes! Get off my point!
It can also help to stay close to walls, as you might be able to body block your enemy, which won't disadvantage you because you already run so slow. You won't find yourself worrying about your large hitbox, but if you're ever cornered, crouching in place repeatedly can throw off your enemy's aim. And if they're going in for a melee kill because you don't look threatening, your shotgun only gets more powerful the closer you are, so don't give in until you're forced to reload. Lastly, in cases where your enemy is attacking from the air or is retreating, go for the kill immediately. They are incredibly weak in these moments, and you don't want them overpowering you later after landing on the ground or grabbing health. Now, as you've probably observed, I've only been talking about what it's like to play as a light Heavy on his own, but we all know that the fights in TF2 are a team effort, so let's touch base on that. If there's a medic on your team willing to heal you, then you can continue doing what you normally do and have even more success. But if you have team members other than medics around you, you are most effective when you're not the center of attention in a battle. With a medic, you can handle being in that position, but you should actively avoid it in every other circumstance. Flanking is always the preferred way to catch enemies off guard, but if you need to attack with your team right then and there, try using your teammates as human shields. You could dip back and forth through them to trade hits, allowing your team to survive against the enemy onslaught a little longer, however sadistic that process might be. Now that you know what it's like to play as a light Heavy in general, let's take a look at each of his matchups with the normal classes.
There's a sentry down there. No, it was there the whole time!
If you find it difficult to kill scouts as a normal Heavy, you're in for a world of trouble. Scouts that have good accuracy with their scattergun will not be an easy kill, but if they're trying to fight with a different weapon slot or are missing their shots a bunch, you might still have a chance. As for soldiers and demomen, you can treat them both the same in terms of playstyle and damage output. Just make sure to avoid their projectiles by crouch jumping and strafing, and the closer you are to them, the better, for they'll suffer from any blast damage they inflict onto themselves. Any sustained fire damage from a pyro will very likely kill you because of your low health, so stay out of their fire radius as best you can. However, if they're busy air blasting, you should then be able to get away with a couple of hits. A matchup with another Heavy will be a joke at your expense, for there is no way you could face off against a better version of yourself. Unless they are running Fat Scout or using melee or are on low health already, you definitely need to stay out of their line of sight. Out of the engineers I came across during my playtime, I had no trouble disposing of those that use the Rescue Ranger or a different weapon slot, provided I was nowhere near their sentry gun. I'd imagine that if they were using any other primary, excluding the Thompson 6000 of course, you could expect to have a mostly even matchup given the difference in health and speed. Now, a medic matchup is a joke that you can laugh at, for they are very easy to kill, but only if they are alone. If they're not alone, you're not going to be able to get away with killing their healing target, unlike if you were a normal heavy. Sniper is just plain annoying, as any headshot or body shot will severely cripple you. If you're going to face them, check that no one else is around to distract the sniper and get as close to them as possible without them noticing. And finally, a spy will instinctually become trick stab happy around you, so dealing with them is as simple as walking in the same direction as them. Keep your eyes fixed to the spy, start backpedaling if they jump, and you'll have no trouble at all taking out the trash. Well, we've certainly learned a lot about this watered down version of heavy that you'll likely never actually try for yourself. But what are my final thoughts on this loadout? Obviously, there is no reason to play as a light heavy in a competitive setting. You are only disadvantaging yourself when you could be even more effective as a fat scout with a minigun on standby. But it was definitely a challenge to be playing heavy with a completely different mindset than he's normally known for. Additionally, the ability for me to use both a shotgun and a lunchbox item was quite surreal, and I enjoyed my time trying it out, but I will only ever play as the light heavy for the novelty of it from now on. Anyways, that's the end of the video, everybody. I've been working on the script and gameplay footage for this for at least a month by now, and I haven't really posted many videos up to this point, so it would really help if you shared this video around. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment, check out my TF2 server, the link to the announcement will be in the description, and as always, I'll see you all next time. This video was funded in part by JLX's non-actual name. May you forever be memorialized within this specific credit screen.